AJ Swann hits the transfer portal, and the Tigers add a punter. A lot to do. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Kyren Lacy opts out of the Texas Bowl. We'll talk about what that means for the offense. Tigers add a punter in the transfer portal, why that's significant. But we'll start with the most significant spot on the field, the quarterback spot, as we learned that AJ Swann is entering the transfer portal. The caveat there with Swann is that he is going to stick around through the bowl game. So if you're not familiar with the rule, the transfer portal doesn't necessarily mean you are leaving a program legally, right? Putting your name in the portal only legally allows other schools to contact you. However, it's generally understood that if you're entering the transfer portal, it is your intent to leave that school, but you don't necessarily have to. A year ago, for example, Sage Ryan put his name into the transfer portal and then withdrew and stayed at LSU. And that's certainly up to the discretion of the coach in that program if they want a player who's in the transfer portal to continue being a part of their program. And in this situation, and I'll talk about Swann and what it means for the quarterback position at LSU in the future here in a second, but for the bowl game specifically, this makes so much sense for Brian Kelly to allow AJ Swann to stay through the bowl game. First of all, LSU's pursuit of Michael Van Buren in the transfer portal wasn't because AJ Swann was leaving. That's important to note. AJ Swann, we would have to assume, would stay at LSU if the Tigers hadn't gone and added Michael Van Buren from Mississippi State. But LSU saw an opportunity to upgrade the quarterback position. They did. And so as a result, that clearly meant AJ Swann didn't factor into LSU's plans for 2025. At best would be your number 3 quarterback. And so this is a good opportunity for him to go somewhere else and play. But when you look at the bowl game itself, you're down to Garrett Nussmeier and and Colin Hurley. Ricky Collins has already transferred. He's landed at Syracuse. And with Swann going to the portal, if he left, you would have Nussmeier. And then if anything were to happen to Nussmeier behind a newly fangled offensive line, newly configured offensive line, it would be Colin Hurley taking his first ever snaps in that bowl game against Baylor and Dave Aranda's defense. And I don't think that's something LSU's interested in. So for AJ Swann, he's in the portal. He can have communication with other schools. He can determine what his landing spot will be for 2025 and continue to practice throughout the bowl preparation here. And if something, God forbid, did happen to Nussmeier in the bowl game and LSU found themselves in need of going to a backup quarterback, Swann would be that guy, and you have a guy that is experienced. So I like the fact that Swann is willing to stay and Brian Kelly is willing to let him stay through the bowl game, because with opt-outs, we know positions and players and rosters get thin. And so if you can have guys stay through the bowl game, great. So I'm very much in favor of AJ Swann staying. Now, let's talk about why AJ Swann is leaving and sort of what we know about Swann. So remember, AJ Swann was in the class of 2022, signed with Vanderbilt. As a freshman at Vanderbilt back in 2022, he ended up starting half the season for Vanderbilt. Played in 9 games with 6 starts, threw for over 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions. So there was this anticipation maybe for AJ Swann as a sophomore in 2023 at Vanderbilt. He started the first 5 games of the season, but it didn't go very well. He did throw for nearly 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns, but the 7 interceptions and a very bad, a very bad start to the season for Vanderbilt. Ultimately led Vanderbilt to move on to the backup. And Swann did come back and start the final game of that year against Tennessee, and he had a pretty good day. I have the box score right here. He threw for 167 yards and a touchdown. He was 14 of 23, so pretty efficient day against a good Tennessee team a year ago. But anyway, so Swann starts 12 games at Vanderbilt, and remember where LSU was a season ago. You have Nussmeier coming back, but Jaden Daniels going to the draft. So it's Nussmeier, and then redshirt freshman Ricky Collins, and true freshman early enrollee reclassified Colin Hurley. That was your quarterback room. You had to fill that gap in the middle. You had to get somebody with experience. So for Swann, it was a situation kind of like what Michael Van Buren stepping into this year. Swann knew he was coming to LSU to be Garrett Nussmeier's backup, but with the idea that potentially could become compete to start in 2025 when Nussmeier left, in theory, and also the opportunity to be Nussmeier's backup, to be the first off the bench. And he got that opportunity in 2 games this year. Garrett was injured against Florida, had to leave for a play, and then against Oklahoma, where he left for a series, and AJ Swann got to go finish a series and then play the next. That didn't go very well. I think the small sample size that LSU had with AJ Swann didn't necessarily force them into the portal to go find a more talented backup option, but if one presented itself, they were right to pursue it, and that's what happened with Michael Van Buren. So fast forward to now, with Garrett Nussmeier coming back, Swann obviously doesn't have the opportunity to start in 2025. And so remember now, he'll be entering his 4th year of college, and he started those 12 games at Vanderbilt, but he's looking for an opportunity to go get on the field. So Garrett Nussmeier returning is one reason why AJ Swann is going to exit stage left. He's going to go try to find a place where he could play and get on the field in 2025. But the other part of that conversation is the addition of Michael Van Buren. So if you missed that episode, you can go back to last week. We talked plenty about LSU adding Michael Van Buren from Mississippi State, a guy who became their starter in Starkville this year when Blake Shapen, the starting quarterback, was injured. So Van Buren ended up starting more than half the season in Starkville. And what I don't mind sharing with you is that LSU's NIL deal, or I guess part of the rev share, however you want to phrase it, right? NIL, rev share, whatever, for Michael Van Buren was $400,000. So LSU is paying Van Buren $400,000 for the 2025 season. That is a very heavy investment into a player that you don't expect to be the starter. And by the way, that's 1 year. So we could look into next offseason, and when Garrett Nussmeier is out of eligibility, and there could be a similar situation like this. You have AJ Swann, but a better quarterback became available in Michael Van Buren, so you went and got him. Michael Van Buren will be on your roster, but next year at this time, there could be a more attractive quarterback option in the portal that you go get. So I don't think there's any certainty surrounding Michael Van Buren for the 2025 season to be the starter. It would certainly he would be the odds-on favorite. Now, 2026, forgive me. Of course, years are blending together. Nussmeier's back for 25, and Van Buren will be the backup, with the idea that in his 3rd year in school, his 2nd year at LSU, he would be the front runner to be the starter in 2026. However, if next year at this time, a better quarterback option hits the portal, you go pursue him. Because like we've talked about with every position, you are looking to actively make your roster better always. It's very much like an NFL roster building model. Now, during the season, there's free agency in the NFL, and you don't have that option in college, but you have a bigger roster. So when you have the option in these portal windows to make yourself better at a position, you do. It's why LSU added Michael Van Buren. But make no mistake, they're not paying Michael Van Buren $400,000 to come and be the 3rd quarterback behind AJ Swann. So for Swann, this just became very obvious. Van Buren's coming in. He's going to be Nussmeier's number 2. That path to the field doesn't exist. So Swann's going to go somewhere else. Where that also leaves LSU is in need of another quarterback. So remember, with Ricky Collins leaving and now AJ Swann leaving, you've lost that middle from Nussmeier to Colin Hurley. You've lost both guys in the middle. Now you've added Van Buren, but you still have to add another player. And maybe you could say Colin Hurley steps up into that middle with Van Buren, and so you have to add a younger player. Now, the high school window for now, the signing period is closed, but you do have a February signing date. LSU did get in the mix for Bryce Baker, who had been committed to North Carolina, decommitted when Mac Brown was fired, and then ultimately recommitted to North Carolina once Bill Belichick was hired. But maybe there's a freshman you go after, or maybe it's an FCS quarterback that that LSU goes after that maybe is just looking to step up another level in competition. If nothing else, it's a body, it's a camp arm, it's a practice arm. And maybe you take a guy who has always wanted the opportunity to put on the uniform, to run out the tunnel at a Power 5 school like LSU, and comes in just as a depth piece. So that's certainly something that could happen. But if you're LSU, you can't go into this season with only 3 quarterbacks. I mean, last year you had 4. You have to think of it in terms of having a quarterback every single year. And 2018 is the example I'll always point to. It's an outlier, but it shows you how precarious things can be. You watch both Justin McMillan and Lowell Narcisse transfer after you brought in Joe Burrow. So you had Burrow, who was starting for the first time. You had Miles Brennan, who at this point was in his second year, ultimately redshirted that year. But as we learned, Brennan was injured, and your backup was actually a walk-on. So you have to find a way. I'm not saying it's easy, but you have to find a way to add another body to that quarterback room. But AJ Swann, as we know, is out. Michael Van Buren will be Garrett Nussmeier's backup, with potentially an eye on being the starter in 2026. So AJ Swann out, but the Tigers weren't done. They added another transfer via the portal on Thursday. I want to talk about him next. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or you were paying for twice? If so, that's happened to literally millions of people. You have a few subscriptions you didn't realize you were paying for. Rocket Money makes it so easy to track them down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app. It helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So check out Rocket Money. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions. Reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. We're also brought to you today by Game Time. Hey, the college football playoff is here. Could not be more fired up for it. You want to be at the college football playoff? You want to be at the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the national championship game? You want to be at LSU's Texas Bowl game against Baylor? Remember, you got to use Game Time. Love Game Time. During the holidays, you want to be at live events. Maybe it's sporting events. Maybe it's bowl games. Maybe it's concerts or theater or anything, comedy shows. Make sure you check out Game Time. The features that I love the most, the curated deals, of course, the all-in pricing that I tell you about all the time. If you've ever had that experience before where you go to one of those secondary ticketing apps and you think you're paying a certain price, by the time you get to checkout, they dump all the fees on it, you realize, oh, that's not the price I thought I was paying. You don't have to worry about that with Game Time. You got to turn on the all-in pricing feature. When you toggle, it'll show you the final price up front. So there's no surprises when you get to checkout. It's at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, y'all. Do it right now. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. So the Tigers see AJ Swann exit, but they did add a player via the portal as well, with Grant Chadwick jumping aboard. So Grant Chadwick is a punter from Middle Tennessee. And it's an interesting one because the Tigers have two veteran punters that could both return in Peyton Todd and Blake Oxendorf, who transferred in from Louisiana Tech before the start of fall camp. And I think the way that this season went is a pretty clear illustration of how much, LSU needs to make sure they address their specialists. Peyton Todd was a guy when he signed with LSU out of West Monroe that was a big-legged kicker, but the knock on him was the inconsistency. And that showed. And if you remember, after the spring game, Brian Kelly was asked point blank about Peyton Todd. And Brian Kelly said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he would have liked to have seen him really grab hold of the job, but didn't do that. So LSU went into that spring portal window and added Blake Oxendorf from Louisiana Tech, who was an all-conference punter with the Bulldogs. And those two battled throughout fall camp for the starting job, and neither grabbed a hold of it. And so we saw both of them play. We saw, for a time, Peyton Todd be the long punter. Oxendorf would be more the pooch punter. Ultimately, Oxendorf took over the role. He struggled, and then Todd took the role back from him. And it was so disappointing. And I'll illustrate a bit why adding someone like Grant Chadwick is just from a number standpoint, purely number standpoint, is effective. So Grant Chadwick this year, as a true freshman at Middle Tennessee, had 13 punts beyond 50 yards. 13 punts that went beyond 50 yards. Oxendorf and Peyton Todd combined for one. Blake Oxendorf had one punt go beyond 50 yards. Peyton Todd didn't have any. Chadwick had 21 punts downed inside the 20-yard line. Todd and Oxendorf combined for 12. You can even look at the averages. Peyton Todd averaged 41.6 yards per punt. Oxendorf, 40 yards per punt. Chadwick averaged more than 43 yards per punt. It's one of those things where when you look at specialists, I'm not really interested in I'm not really interested in where you played, because you don't worry about the translatability. Like, will the skill set transfer? For example, if you're a 100 tackle guy in the FCS, will that skill set transfer? If you're a 1,000-yard rusher in the WAC, will that transfer to the SEC when you're playing bigger, faster defenders? Like, that is a legitimate question if the skill set transfers. With punters, it doesn't matter. Like, the field is still 100 yards long. It's just what it is. Can you kick? Can you down punts? Can you angle kicks? It's a very specific skill set where you're not worried about the competition. Sure, we could talk about the rush being faster and all that sort of stuff. And how do you do in a bigger stadium with higher stakes? Maybe that's fair to ask. It's kind of like the old cliche about golfers. Can you translate it from the driving range to the course? There's a lot of people who can stand over putts on a putting green and stroke them all day. Well, what happens when you're on 18 at the Masters facing down an 11-foot putt to win the Masters? Like, can you make it with the TV cameras and all the pressure? So there's some degree of that here with place kickers and with punters. But, I mean, one of the greatest punters we've seen ever at LSU is Cole Tracy, who came from Division II Assumption. He translated very good. And that's place kicking, which is, I would say there's far greater pressure there than punting. So, the problem LSU had all throughout fall camp, I mean, we talked about it. They'd boom. I mean, I have my notes in my desk here somewhere, but you'd have these kickers boom. I'm looking for it. I'm looking for my notebook. It's in here somewhere. But anyway, you'd have the punters boom a 60-yarder in the air, and then the next kick would be a 90-degree angle that would go 13 yards and just go onto another field. It was startling, the inconsistency. So you go out, you add Chadwick, an opportunity to make your team immediately better. And it continues to underscore that point, which is you have to look at your roster as an NFL roster. I don't mean that like the cliche, well, it's the NFL now because guys are getting paid. I mean the approach to building a roster. In the NFL, you are always, always, always looking at how you can upgrade your roster at every single position. Always. You can do it in trades, in the draft, in free agency. And you may think the player you have right now at a position is good, and he may be. But what if someone comes available that's attainable, that's better, and it makes you better? Then you go get that player. College football works the same way now, but you don't have the luxury of in-season trades or free agency or picking up guys off a waiver wire. Your roster is your roster once you start the season. So if you have an opportunity in the offseason to make your team better, you do. Is it possible that Peyton Dodd and Blake Oxendorf could come back and improve and be really good? Yes, that's possible. But it's also possible they don't. And so if you're a coach or Austin Thomas, the GM in this case, you are being negligent if you have an opportunity to add a player that could make your team better and you don't. So could AJ Swann have been a serviceable backup? Yes. Is Michael Van Buren a better backup? Absolutely. Could Peyton Todd or Blake Oxendorf have improved this year? Sure. Is Grant Chadwick already a better option than those two? Yes. So bring him in, let them compete if they stay, or maybe they transfer, and it's what it is. But either way, you've taken a step to make your team better. Look, LSU was one of the worst in net punting in the SEC this year. This is an opportunity to address a spot that you have to address. One other thing worth mentioning, you still don't have a special teams coordinator. Remember, Slade Nagel was your tight ends coach and your special teams. I don't technically have the title, but of coordinator. It is worth mentioning that Bob Diaco, who's an analyst on staff, did work with the special teams. Remember, analysts can coach on the field now at practice. So Bob Diaco, when we were out there in fall camp, ran a lot of the special teams drills. So even though you haven't replaced Slade Nagel yet with someone with that special teams title, Bob Diaco is still there and is a guy who could certainly help you there, you work through those situations and all the special teams, depending on when LSU does add that tight ends coach and if they have the special teams coordinator role as well. So another transfer addition for the Tigers, this time a specialist in punter Grant Chadwick, who, by the way, was on the Ray Guy Award watch list this past season as a true freshman with the Blue Raiders at Middle Tennessee. Okay, it is Locked on LSU, your team every day. Tigers getting ready for the bowl, and there is one more significant opt-out. We already told you about it, but now it's official. We'll kind of run through what that means. Locked on LSU, your team every day. It is time. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Well, LSU isn't in the college football playoff. They'll be playing in the Texas Bowl, and they'll be playing without Kyren Lacy, who did formally announce that he's entering the NFL draft. Just for a point of clarification, Kyren Lacy's out of eligibility, so he was going to the draft either way. It's not a situation like CJ Daniels, who showed up at Liberty in 2020, but in 2022 played in only 3 games due to injury. So he has a 6th year, the super senior year of eligibility. Kyren played at ULL in 2020, so that COVID year doesn't count. But in 2021, he played in every game for the Cajuns. And then over his 3 years in Baton Rouge, he played in every game. So he has exhausted his eligibility. I think Kyren's announcement was really just to declare that he was not participating in the bowl game, which is something that I think we had already told you. So as you look at who's available and who's not available for LSU in the Texas Bowl, we spent some time talking about the offensive line already. You're going to see a makeshift offensive line where the only player at the position they started all year is DJ Chester, who was your weakest lineman. Paul Mabenga improved over the final month. He'll be at left guard. Tyree Adams will be at left tackle, replacing Will Campbell. At right guard, we'll see Bo Bordelon get his first opportunity to start. And Miles Frazier, who's going to play in the ball game, is going to kick out and play right tackle. Remember, Miles Frazier played offensive tackle at FIU before he transferred into LSU 3 years ago. So you know that's your offensive line, and Garrett Nussmeier is going to play in the game. You have Aaron Anderson back, which is fantastic, but no Mason Taylor, no Kyren Lacy, no CJ Daniels, meaning 3 of your top 4 receivers won't be available for this game. You know, with Kyren Lacy gone, I think the major opportunity goes to Chris Hilton. And while Chris and Kyren have different skill sets and are a different dynamic, you know, we have waited to see Chris Hilton emerge into being a guy that we all saw him become in fall camp before the injury cost him, you know, two-thirds of the season. But at the end of the year, in the final 2 games against Vanderbilt and against Oklahoma, we saw Chris Hilton pop. You saw the promise and the potential. You saw the touchdown catches. You saw the deep threat ability. That's there for Chris Hilton. And with Kyren Lacy and CJ Daniels and Mason Taylor not there, Chris Hilton is the one that should stand to benefit the most. Listen, Aaron Anderson was your second leading receiver this year. He's going to get his targets. And you probably see more of Xavion Thomas in this game. And I would submit as well, this is a huge opportunity for Trey'Dez Green. Now, without Mason Taylor, if you need a true inline blocking tight end, Giovanni Peterson, the former walk-on who's played a ton of special teams for LSU this year, is probably that guy. So look to see 45 Giovanni Peterson play tight end, maybe start at tight end for LSU in this bowl game if Trey'Dez Green stays at receiver. But really, the 2 guys who stand to benefit the most from CJ Daniels entering the portal and then Kyren Lacy and Mason Taylor opting out of the bowl game are Chris Hilton and Trey'Dez Green. Remember, no Kamorian Pimpton either. So it's going to look different. And it'll be interesting to see where Nuss goes with the football. But understandable, Kyron's not going to play. Disappointing to be sure, but exciting to see how a guy like Chris Hilton what he may make of the opportunity, make the most of the opportunity. Remember, even some of the other younger guys you'd expect to step up, a guy like Shelton Sampson is in the portal, so he won't be there either. You know, it's an opportunity where a lot of the depth pieces ahead of him are gone. It would have been a great opportunity to get more reps and playing time. But instead, Chris Hilton, number 3, will likely be the one that we keep an eye on offensively as someone who probably could have a breakout, bust-out performance with more targets. So we'll keep counting you down to LSU and Baylor in the Texas Bowl on New Year's Eve. And, of course, as we have more portal news, we'll talk about it right here on Locked on LSU. Hey, thanks for making us your first listen. Shout out to the everydayers who are with us every single day. We appreciate you so much. Now for your second listen, go check out Locked on SEC with our guy, Chris Gordy. No doubt he'll have the college football playoff with the SEC teams covered there. Hey, if you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know they love the Tigers. We got you every day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.